Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see everybody, except for the two people I can't see, and that's your choice, and I don't blame you. If I could not be seen, I would not be seen. So this is I've always liked Sue Miller, but I think this is just really an extraordinarily good book. And it's a book that took her a very long time to write, 6 years. And which for her is quite a long time. I think she's about my age, which I'm 72, and it's it's sort of that whole long beginning in Cambridge in the late 70s. I moved to Boston in 1979. And so it was so redolent for me to kind of I just felt like I was back, I had two friends who owned bookstores in Harvard Square, and, it was just, and I was just a grad student, but I do think that it's a book that, even though it deals with an obviously very, very serious subject, but I think she does this kind of wonderful trick of making you care so much about all the characters that, I mean, even the smallest, the next door neighbor, the elderly next door neighbor just gets these wonderful little scenes. And the generosity that Annie has for her is just really so moving, I think. But I have an old, we get these advanced reader copies at the store frequently, although they're making them less and less. But there's a letter from Sue Miller at the tucked into the beginning of the book that I thought I would read a bit of it to you, just to sort of plant you in what she was, what was the impulse behind the book. Well, first of all, maybe I should say, did the book move you? Did it capture your attention, even though it's such a serious subject? And you're perfectly, it's great when you don't like something, but all right. Well, let me read this a little bit to you. Dear reader, in 2001, I finished the writing of a memoir about my father, who had died of Alzheimer's disease 10 years earlier. As I worked on the book on and off in those years, I was struck with how the writing of it was slowly transforming my sense of him, transforming my understanding of who he had been and what had mattered to him. All of that gradually altered my sense of myself, too, of course, both in relation to him and to the world. It seemed to me then, and still does, that he had somehow reached across the deep divide between the dead and the living to tell me something, to teach me and change me. This idea struck me profoundly at the time, but it was only years later that I began to imagine exploring that experience fictionally, and then to try to conjure a story that would let me do that. There would be a marriage, I thought, a good marriage ended by death. Then there would be a discovery, a rift that would destroy my main character, the surviving wife, and the idea that she had known her husband at all. That would destroy her sense that her marriage had value, had been what she had thought it was all along. And in the end, there would be the way she finds to escape her bitterness and sorrow, the way being a kind of revelation, as I imagined it. Though how this revelation would arrive, I didn't yet know. So I launched myself into Graham and Annie's marriage, the way it begins, the way it ends, and then the revelation to Annie, but to me too, of the way it begins and ends again. Monogamy has taken me 6 years to write, and though I sometimes despaired of ever finishing it, I loved living with these characters and their rich, complicated world. I remember, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, so don't quote me on this, but I think I remember reading an interview with her where she talked about two very, very good friends of hers who were extremely well-known writers, kind of helping her to get rid of one chunk of the book and open up the book in a whole different way to her, which just sort of freed her finally. She was just sort of stuck at a certain point. And so, but one of the things, and if you go back and you read reviews or read her books, one of the things that people talk about her all the time is the subtlety and intelligence of her sort of psychological knowledge of the way people are. And even if you don't like a book of hers, because, the story may not appeal to you or whatever, there are few writers writing these kinds of books, just about sort of this contained worlds that write with more acuity about the way we are. I mean, I could embarrass myself 1,000 times and just, I made note after note in the book of saying, yes, I did that exact thing or whatever. It's just, she's just so smart about who we are. And I think that oh, hi, Hannah. I think I think this book is one of the smartest books. One of the greatest plays about, or smartest plays about love or contemporary love that I know is Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing. And I feel like this book does kind of the same thing that The Real Thing does, which is it pulls you into these characters, and then you get angry with them, or you get frustrated with them. But the more that they talk and the more that they engage you, you start to slowly become Anton Chekhov and stop judging them and just allow for whatever they're doing to kind of just enter you. And I think these kinds of books, when they're done as well as this one is, they really stay in you a long time, and they can give you a kind of template for how your own behavior can be sloppy. And you know how sometimes when you're reading a book and you've gotten so involved with the character and they start to make a terrible choice, and it's like, you want to say, no, don't do that, don't do that, Jesus, and I just love that feeling, when you're just that kind of pulled into people's lives. Let me ask just a question about, she does in this book, and she's done this in 2 or 3 of her other books, something that a lot of people do. Let me think of a good example. Hold it. Louise Erdrich. Louise Erdrich does this too, where they'll shift. Each chapter will be told from a different point of view. Does that kind of approach to storytelling hold you in the story? Does it annoy you? I mean, what are people? Does anyone have an opinion about that? Yes or no? Good or bad?
I feel like it just sort of I enjoy it because I feel like I have a better sense of what's going on and of how I just like seeing things from everyone's perspective. Yeah. Or sort of getting a sense of what else how they're looking at the situation or how they're thinking about a certain event. And that helps me have a more insight into them, I think, rather than just knowing them from one person's point of view.
Right, or from
someone else's. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and in this story, kind of building on what Karen said, Sue Miller teed you up by the end of a chapter when she was going to switch to somebody else. So it never really felt to me as if I knew that I was hearing from a different person, but it seemed to just naturally flow because that's how the chapter before ended.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting idea. Wow. Anybody else have a thought on that?
I like.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Sorry, Allison.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I like that kind of setup because it's also enjoyable as the reader to have other information that that the other character doesn't have. Like Sarah has no idea why her mother is telling her, don't what was the word she used? Not romanticize, but something about hold her father precious or something like that.
Yeah.
And Sarah has no clue why her mother is saying that to her, and Annie isn't about to tell her. So we know as the reader why. So, Allison, you go.
No. Oh, I was just going to say it's kind of as if we get to. I really enjoyed this switching, through different characters, and we sort of get to have it's almost like we get the advantage of the omniscient narrator, but at the same time we're in each self, you know, as they're experiencing different things in the story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I love. Go ahead. Who started to say something?
It was me. I think too, for some of this, like when Sarah was talking about not wanting to share her relationship with her brother and her mother, and that was just so devastating. And there's no other way you would have been able to see that except through her eyes, you know, and that was such an important and beautiful and awful moment, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciated it.
Yeah, I just think the book's full of those kinds of moments, you know, where something happens, and then when you get the shift of the perspective, then you get the other person, what happened inside them while it was happening. You know, like that horrible, excruciating moment when the two wives of Graham are talking about you know, the affair, and the first wife thinks that she's talking about the affair that happened many, many years before. And then once, of course, you can't, then you're really stuck. And, you know, and then later Sue Miller takes us to that moment where she tells us how stuck she was, because, you know, but it's like you know, the way Shakespeare would set up a comedy. So, you know, the audience is ahead of what's going on. And that's what kind of creates we have the knowledge that the other people don't, and so it makes it, you know, just sort of, it gives it even deeper resonance. What else about the book? Well, let me ask you something. Let's talk about the way she introduces. I mean, you know, the first chapter is about Annie, and Annie kind of tells the story of her first excruciating marriage, and then you know, meeting Graham, and but all the while, you know, that these events are happening, you know, you're also getting little clues that are then going to echo through the whole rest of the book. I mean, if you look at the end of the first chapter of the chapter about Annie, where, but you know, well, first look at, I think it's page 12. I'm hoping it's page, you know, the very end of the first short chapter. But that very last paragraph is what I want to talk about. But just above it, she says, but Graham was persistent, a joyous lover, an enthusiast, and finally Annie gave over to him. How could she not? She'd been waylaid, really, by happiness, by his love for her, and then more slowly, hers for him. But then she says, occasionally through their years together, and in spite of everything that was pleasurable and loving between them, she would feel it again, the sense of his having overtaken her somehow, overwhelmed her. You know, and then that just kind of dances through the book over and over again, where she questions her own abilities, her own, you know, sense of confidence, her own kind of sense of completion of who she is. And her, you know, her children both say to her quite openly, you know, you were cold, you protected yourself, you didn't reveal yourself to us. And so we sort of know her story, and so we're sort of teed up, to use your expression, Mary Pat. We're sort of teed up to meet this wonderful guy Graham, you know, whoever he might be, and you know, it's just. And then the very first thing we find out is that he's, you know, he couldn't sleep, and he's kind of hanging around and downstairs. And the second page, on page 14 of the first, when we're first meeting him, he says about himself, sorry in every sense of the word, he thinks now, in his comfortable kitchen, a sorry bastard, my fault. And I just think that one of the great things about him as a character is his such clear vision of how much space he takes up and what he kind of asks of other people. And it's kind of terrifying, really. You know, this big, gargantuan, intelligent guy who owns a bookstore, he tells us, because he realized, I have to stop writing the damn novel, and realize that it's not a book that I would want anybody else to read, let alone me. So having a bookstore, gave him a way to have a life. But I just think that's so great, that she does it over and over in the book. I think she sets you up she does tee you up for one thing, but frequently what she tees you up for is not what you get. You get something else instead that's connected, but surprising. And so she's kind of constantly keeping you a little off balance. And, when I remember when I wrote about it for the newsletter, and I really meant what I said that I felt like I really knew these people so well, that they really did seem like a family that I knew. And I just think that that's because she makes them so fully complicated. What did you think of what did you think of their relationship? Or as he says later, things with Annie, your marriage, you asshole. What did you think of their marriage?
James, I want to comment about your original question about the book. I didn't think this book measured up to the other two books we've discussed. I think she's an excellent writer. I enjoyed reading it, but by the time I ended the book, I'd have to say my favorite character was Sam the cat, because all the human characters I felt like made bad choices, and I was so frustrated with just about every character in the book that I was unhappy about a lot of things. I was unhappy we never met her childhood friend, Sonia. I thought she was setting us up for that. The guy that she almost had an affair with, he couldn't have been a bigger disappointment when she reconnected with him. And maybe this is being a white, overweight male liberal, but Graham had it all. I can't believe that he continued to feel the need to cheat on Annie when she was so good for him, and he could have been happy, yet he still had to have the two affairs. She never even found out about the first one. And I just thought both Frida and Annie could have been much more self-actualized as people, but they weren't. So I had a real mixed reaction by the time I got to the end.
Yeah, well, that's great. So talk more about the self-actualization. Tell me what you...
Well, I guess I thought both women had a lot of potential, but they both let themselves be defined by Graham, who had a lot of good qualities, but he was flawed in so many ways that I think Frida never got over him. And I guess Annie had an epiphany the last 2 pages, but they shouldn't have let themselves be defined by him. And I just was expecting Annie especially to come through it differently or in a better way.
Uh-huh.
And my mother was widowed twice, so I could relate to a lot of things, but I just thought it almost seemed like they were women from the 1950s in that they couldn't define themselves except through this man who ended up being a jerk in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, but I think you didn't think they both were aware of that? I mean, of the struggle they were having with that?
Yes, but I was hoping by the time we got to the end of the book, they would both be feeling better about themselves as people.
Yeah.
And I didn't think they were.
Let's some of the women chime in about that. But
I was going to respond a little bit to what Larry said, is I think Annie, and before her Frida, right? They were living with somebody who had an outsized personality, an oversized personality. You know, whether or not he really did, he thought he did, and that's how he was viewed. And I think that when somebody falls in love with a person like that, it's really easy for them to become subsumed by that personality. Even though, you know, Annie had her photography and she made it work. She, you know, she forged ahead. But with somebody like Graham, she didn't have to be, maybe not because she didn't want to be, but she didn't have to be the one to be outgoing and do all the things that he did, because he was so greater than life at it. And so I never looked at her as somebody who didn't, you know, live up to her potential. It was that she just didn't, she didn't need to, in a way. And that was part of what made their relationship work, because clearly out of the two women that Graham was married to, he didn't pick women who were, what's the word I want to use? You know, just real forceful and demanding, and because they would have overpowered him, and that never would have worked for him.
But they also weren't subservient to him, I didn't feel like. I mean, I think there were times when, you know, Annie talked about, you know, the times when she wasn't working on her photography, but I think I think she was fulfilled in a lot of the things that she did do in terms of, you know, the parties and the events and the bookstore and their life together. I think that she reveled in that. And I think, you know, you can look at plenty of people where one person in the relationship is really the bigger in life, bigger than all life person, you know, but the other person only seems maybe a little bit diminished in comparison, as opposed to not really diminished. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm, yeah. Remember, Larry, that Rosencrantz says to Guildenstern, "I'm only good in support." But, anybody?
Well, and maybe I shouldn't compare her to Anne Hathaway or the women in the seasonal books, but they were all, I mean, imagine being your own woman married to William Shakespeare. I agree, Diane, that she should have been happy about the role she played, but I felt in the book that her realization was that she thought she was fulfilled and happy, but she came to the conclusion that she was not, because she was too much of a supporting player. And she really, I didn't think she dedicated herself to her photography the way she wanted to when she was younger. And to me, the last 2 pages of the book undercut her unhappiness through the last third of the book.
So this thought just popped into my head, something that you said, and I'm not quite sure yet where I'm even going with it. I'm going to be real honest about that. So my aunt, who, I mean, I was maybe 22 at the time. Her husband died, same thing. She woke up one morning and my uncle had died of a massive heart attack in bed. She had 5 children, and there were still three children at home. I mean, she was only 50, maybe early 50s. He was about 10 years older than her. And at the time, I thought I was very grown up at that age, but I didn't know. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, he died in bed, how awful. And but reading this book made me start thinking about it. And something, Larry, that you just said, my aunt was a traditional You know, she was a traditional housewife. He worked, she raised the kids. And then once he died, she still had family that she had to provide for. And she became a different version of herself. And, you know, kind of like some of the things that Annie started doing. You know, all of a sudden, my aunt she had time. She didn't have someone else that she had to answer to. I mean, by all accounts, she speaks of my uncle as, and, you know, she had a very wonderful marriage. But, you know, I kind of look at some of the things that she did in her life after she became a widow. And in some ways, she had a much more fuller life because she got to explore things that she had never thought about when she was married.
Yeah, I think that for me, and I've gone through this, right, that I don't know how you have an identity in a marriage that isn't somehow defined by that marriage, right? I mean, the longer that you've been with someone, the more likely it is that they're part of your personality and you're part of their personality, and how you behave as a person is going to be dependent on what they need and how you can support one another. So I think once that person is removed from that equation, of course that changes who you are and what you're able to do or what you even want to do. So I think, you know, looking at this story and at I think that Annie was being a supportive spouse and that she loved him deeply, and he was a flawed human, but I feel like, aren't all of us at some level flawed humans? And I loved the aspect of this book where it's like how different people perceived Graham, right? That, you know, you have these public personas and you have your friend personas, then you have your marriage persona. Those three things are really different. And I thought she did a great job of capturing like how all these different people would view him. And I think Annie had the deepest view of what he was and still loved him and supported him, which was an amazing thing.
The other thing too is I wonder, you know, I mean, the focus on this was on Graham and his, you know, outsized personality because he's the one that died. And I started thinking about what if Annie had been the one who died? Mm-hmm. Would things about his life have been defined by his relationship with her? You know, at one point, Frida's talking about what Graham was like when she was married to him. He was this tall, gangly, geeky guy and unattractive. And then he got contact lenses and grew a beard and he got nicer clothes. And all of a sudden he became sexy. And that was right before he met Annie, I believe. But I mean, obviously his relationship with her also kind of changed who he was a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. You going to say something, Larry?
Well, but again, Frida at the end seemed to feel like it was a mistake for her to be so tightly intertwined with their family. And I just keep coming up with things like, I really liked the daughter and the way they developed her with her NPR voice and the way she fell in love. And I was so looking forward to her boyfriend meeting the family. And then when she wouldn't even tell the family that she had the boyfriend, I thought it was a bad reflection on everyone that she would hide this, but I was waiting for that impact because that would have changed the dynamic of everybody in that family. And that's, I guess, I just had all of these frustrations at the end because it's like, what do you mean the boyfriend's not going to meet the family? What do you mean she's not going to reconnect with Sophie? She's never going to find out about the first affair if she was devastated by the second one. And maybe I'm overthinking it.
You know what I love? This is what's so great about reading novels. It's what's so great about art, about the theater, is each one of us here is coming with our own perspective. And some of us, it's like, I I don't know, I never cared too much about Sarah's boyfriend. And I was focused on, maybe because I have a daughter who's probably about that age. And I was actually out in California helping her move to a new apartment. And so I was all focused on Sarah and, oh God, why isn't she telling him? So I never even thought about the boyfriend. But so I bring all that, but Jed, I love listening to what you have to say, Larry, is because you've written this whole other story in your head that I never even thought about that story. So
It's an equal.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Let me address two things that you've been talking about there. One is the Sarah issue. To me, having grown up in a big family and have had lots of other connections, very intimate connections with other people's families, and heard many stories, to me it was more potent and heartbreaking that she intended to come to that Thanksgiving and tell her family about her boyfriend. But when her mother and her brother played the old tapes that she was just kind of all by herself and unable to have a real relationship, that she just lost. Then she felt, oh, it's just going to sound like something I made up, like it's an imaginary relationship. And I thought that was so true to certain kinds of families. But I just thought of something as I was talking. There's one little moment where I hadn't even thought of this, but there's certain things where in the sort of peripheral characters' lives that they're just so great. You remember when Graham is having lunch with his close friend John, and Graham says that I just don't think she has a dating life at all, talking about Sarah, and John offers cheerfully, maybe she's gay, to which Graham says, well, she could still have a dating life. Yes, of course, John waves his hand as if dismissing his own stupidity. Of course she could. After a moment, his face thoughtful, he says, but it might be a reason she wouldn't talk to you about it. And then Miller writes, they speculate about this. If Sarah were gay, would she feel comfortable telling Annie and Graham, blah, blah, blah. They wonder about it. Is this because Graham is more relaxed about his kids than John is about his? Because Graham is more relaxed, period? Or is it because Sarah is a girl and somehow, because they're both straight men, lesbianism would be easier for either of them to accept than homosexuality? They think so. They think that's right. You just can't escape it, can you? John says, straightness. And then Graham replies, maleness. And I just think that sets up so much else about what goes on in the book, and about the way that they sort of look at their kids. And it's also, I have two really close male friends, and these are the kind of stupid conversations we have all the time.
I like John, and I like that John got Graham to break up with Rosemary.
Yeah,
but then again, I was disappointed. Nobody ever knew that he broke up with Rosemary. I thought maybe Rosemary would tell her something, because Annie recognized that he was his old self the night that he died, but she never found out why. And it was because he finally did the right thing, but nobody found out about it. And I was like, somehow that should have come out.
Larry,
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons you like Allie Smith. It's because she does that exact same thing.
Okay. But why did it work for me there and not here?
I don't know. I'm just saying, but that is the same idea. Because part of life's heartbreak that we all carry are the things we never find out.
Right.
What's magnificent, I would argue the best thing, I think one of the great things about the book is that he does break up with her the day before he dies. And they get that exchange about loving each other, and then see, you might say to yourself, oh, you know what? She's starting to figure things out. Maybe 3 years from now, she'll wake up in bed one morning and go, that's why he was himself that last day. He'd broken up with Rosemary, and that's why she was so heartbroken at the party. in other words, she just hasn't connected those dots. But before I lose my train of thought, and then I'm going to shut up again, let's talk about Sophie Kahn, because I just thought that was an incredible character. But see, I think the point of Sophie Kahn, Larry, well, it wasn't her meeting up with Sophie Kahn again, and meeting up with somebody you've idealized and then be disappointed, like she did with the writer, who, and really, she was only. I mean, a woman picked me up at a theater once, and I found out as we were having a drink later, she was just pissed at her husband because he had called her that morning in Toronto and said, "I can't meet you at the airport. Why don't you stay in New York one more night?" So I was at Torch Song Trilogy by myself. She was sitting next to me. Her name, believe it or not, was Sharon Lover Barron, and she picked me up. Nothing happened because I was a good Catholic boy. But the point being, she was pissed at her husband. If she weren't pissed at her husband, she wouldn't have given me the time of day. She was this babe, and I was this shit bum dressed in a ripped coat, and she just was all over me like a cheap mink. It was great. But I just think that those kinds of things do happen. But see, but Hannah, come here. No, she doesn't like it when I get too excited. But the role of Sophie was to reiterate to Annie that Annie always felt she didn't have a gift, a sense of, that sense of the way that really great artists, have a different way of being disciplined, a different way of approaching life. I mean, she says, the last time Annie had seen Sophie Kahn's name was perhaps 35 years earlier in a New York Times review. So she knew that she was performing. But see, then I would argue, then the very next thing that happens in the book, much like when, the asp seller comes into Cleopatra when everything is doom and gloom, and then you have this little scene of comedy before Cleopatra dies. And I think this little 5-page chapter 16 is about Sophie Kahn and about Annie remembering her adolescent life with Sophie Kahn. And how when you meet another family and you haven't really thought about your own family, when you're 12 or 13 and you think, oh yeah, everybody's family's alike. And then you go to meet a really interesting family and suddenly you want to be adopted by that family because your family's the dullest thing you just can't believe how stupid and dull your family seems all of a sudden. And I just feel like, in other words, I think what she's doing with Sophie Kahn is to have that accidental thing in life where she sees a name and she realizes, oh my God, that's Sophie Kahn. I went to her apartment in Hyde Park all the time. I probably went to Sophie Kahn's apartment in Hyde Park all the time. But, it just, it's about, Sophie Kahn exists to remind us every now and then that Annie feels dissatisfied with the kind of artist she is. Mm. And that she never really had that kind of focus. I remember once Brenda her head kind of exploded when I just turned to her one day and I said, Brenda, Ken Albers is a guy in the theater. I'm just a guy who kind of was in the theater by accident. But Ken Albers' life was the theater. Everything about Ken Albers was the theater. And I could look at Ken and I think, I could never be that guy. And I admired him and I loved him. And a part of me knows I shouldn't be that guy. But the point is, we always want, we're always in these kind of complicated arguments with ourselves about who we are, who we should have been, who we could have been. And then if we're honest with ourselves, we just say, well, you know what? I could never have been Sophie Kahn because I didn't have her dedication. I had this crazy family. And life just led me in a different direction. And I got married to that jerk when I was 23. And, my life just kind of did something else. And
but
so
James, I think that Annie was a better photographer than she thought she was, because going back to, I like the different point of view, I got the impression that everybody else really was touched by her pictures, and she should have realized that she was a better photographer than she thought she was. And it goes back to her self-confidence and her self-image, which to me wasn't what it should have been. And it's like when she wanted to move New York to pursue her career, I felt like Graham, as a failed writer, convinced her that she should also think of herself as a failed photographer because it wasn't going to pan out. And I think she did. There were times where she realized the impact of her photographs, but I don't think as much as she should have.
I agree. And I think that she was self-deprecating to a fault. But again, I would simply argue, I mean, I've known lots and lots of people in the various artistic worlds that I've dabbled in that have that same problem. They just can't own things.
I think that's one of the things I loved so much about the book. I think these people are just so very real. You know, they're all very real and they're all flawed in different ways. And there was this one passage, you know, getting back to, you know, reading and fiction and books and everything that really jumped out at me when I was reading. It's on page 153. And this is what I think too, when, you know, like Larry, when you said something about, you know, we never found out, you know, some of these other things, but that's, I mean, to me, that's kind of life. There's always all these woulda, coulda, shouldas, but it's down near the bottom of the page. It says that we read fiction because it suggests that life has a shape and we feel consoled. Because you read fiction and there's always this arc, you know. Consoled to think that life isn't just one damn thing after another, that it has sequence and consequence. Fictional narrative made life seem to matter, that it pushed away the meaninglessness of death. And that I when I read that phrase, I just had to put the book down. I mean, I just was kind of blown away by that.
Yeah. And Edith is a great character too. I mean, the friends are really good. Any other comments about what Larry, what the three of them were chatting about? Any other? Is there any time in the book that you laughed out loud, even in horror? I have my favorite moment in the book. I mean, I laughed so hard I almost fell off my chair, having done something like this once. But anybody have an idea? Do you remember something that really made you laugh? Okay, go to page 100. And Graham has died. Very few people know. And she's supposed to go to the gallery to help her gallery friend Danielle hang the show. And she has to call Danielle and tell her that she's not coming. You remember that moment? After she was about to go upstairs to get ready to face it when it occurred to her she should let Danielle know that she wasn't going to be able to come to the opening. Oh, that's right, the opening on Sunday. Even though the thought of it seemed impossible. She pushed the numbers in, and after a few rings, Danielle came on. Annie wasn't sure what she said, maybe just, I'm not going to be able to make it on Sunday, something like that. There was a long silence, and then Danielle said, this better be good. I just think it's just one of those moments in your life where the moment you find out what the real news is, you'll never forget saying it. But it's so typical of her. I mean, you know, that's what makes it so great to me, is that's exactly what Danielle would say. Oh, you're not coming to the opening? This better be good. Oh, your husband died. Okay. But it just, you know, those are the things that make it sort of achingly lifelike. Come here, look, treats. I've got treats. It's great. What else? What else are people thinking about? And I really, I don't mean, I'm not, please don't think I'm arguing against you. I'm just, because I love, you know, these are my favorite things about this, when people say, you like that, or you didn't like that. I mean, I love, then, you know, then the whys are what matters.
You know what I thought was I don't know, it felt like a revelation to me. So the title of the book, okay. All along I'm reading monogamy. Of course, this all makes sense, and what she's writing about, and you know, you could argue Frida, you could argue Annie, the fact that Graham is having the affairs. But when it finally got towards the end in the chapter where Sarah is having her musings about her relationship with her boyfriend and how close should she get, and oh, you know, maybe someday I will get married, maybe someday I'll have a child. And then there's just she's thinking, and then there's the one word, monogamy. And then, yeah, she's not sure that was she, but it was, I don't know, it was just a fascinating moment to me where I felt as if the author had, oh, all of a sudden I'm 7/8 of the way through, and now she's telling me, despite all of what I was thinking, which was true, but here's her moment. Now she's telling us why she's chosen the name of the novel. And that one word shows up as its own little standalone sentence, so to speak.
Yeah. Anything else that I mean, like the moment that was any other things you want to read or share with any ideas? Cheryl? I know, I don't want to make you talk if it's okay. Yes, I could.
My moment of horror was when they were talking about after the parties, how they would find glasses on the bookshelves. Don't do that.
Do not do that. Oh, here's a good one. This should I hope will provoke a little conversation before we start. Before we end, you know, it's this is on page 206, and Annie's talking to Frida, and she says, "I hate him." And Frida says, "That's not true. That's the problem. The problem is you don't hate him. You don't." Frida's voice was gentle, as though Annie were a child she were comforting. "No, you're right. I don't. I just want him back." And that's Annie says, "I just want him back." And Frida says, "Of course, that's it." And I think, and we're all thinking, yeah, she just wants him back. But it's Annie's next two short sentences that are really the truth, which is, then I could hate him. I could hit him anyway. And I think, you know, that's where we are sometimes with those things. And I just feel like I was married when I got married when I was 39 to a woman who's a little older than I was. And we had always had a really good friendship, and we probably shouldn't have gotten married, but we did. And when we broke up, maybe 5 or 6 years later, it was amicable, but difficult. And about 2 years later, and 2 years later, she called me up and she said, you know, because she had struck her first husband, knocked him down once. She was so angry with him. And she called me up and she said, "Can you meet me at a neutral site?" She said, "You were too kind during the divorce, and I'm finding I still have a lot of anger. Can you meet me somewhere for a weekend where you will let me metaphorically punch you in the jaw?" And I said, "Sure." And we went and we had a great 2 days, and she punched me in the jaw metaphorically. But I mean, she needed that to finish it, you know. And I think that with Graham's death and then her discovery, and remember, the discovery of the affair doesn't come until, you know, the book's almost 2/3 over before she, you know, so you've already dealt with the mourning. First, you've dealt with the mostly great marriage, except that he's carrying the secret of having had the affair, or is in the affair. He breaks off the affair, promptly dies. She mourns him in the way that most normal people would mourn somebody, which of course there is no normal way to mourn somebody. And then she gets this other second shock, which sends her into this fierce anger. And that's the thing I think that's heartbreaking, is that she doesn't know she has no place to release the anger. You know, there's just no way for her to get rid of that anger. And yet then she says to somebody, maybe it's just herself. She has to pretend. Oh, she says it to Frida. I have to pretend that I'm not angry because I don't want anybody else to know about the affair. You know, and you just think about all the things we all carry, and it's really hard. Anything else?
James, you mentioned you lived in Cambridge. I lived in
Second, Larry.
Cambridge.
Larry, just a minute. In outer space, no one can hear you bark, but unfortunately here I can. So go ahead, try it again.
James, you mentioned that you lived in Cambridge. I lived there for about 2 weeks because I was part of a National Educators for Social Responsibility seminar. And I was really looking forward to her capturing Cambridge. And I didn't feel like she did. I was like, how could you not talk about that magazine place on Harvard Square? How could you not talk about the burger place with all the politicians and all the bookstores? I brought that to the book. I didn't feel like the book really captured how wonderful Cambridge is. And I thought Cambridge was going to be more of a character in the book than it was.
She lives there, you know, and she's lived there for many years. But the thing I loved about it was, but I agree with you. She doesn't dwell at all on Cambridge, and you know, and I must have looked like some Harvard professor because when I walked around the square, a lot of these young undergrads would come by and say, "Morning, sir. Morning." Every now and then I had the feeling of I'd like to say to them, "Your last paper sucked," but I thought, no, I can't do that. You know, I can't ruin this. But I did love that little offhand comment very early in the book where it says, does Harvard Square really need another bookstore? That felt like, yeah, that was Cambridge in the 70s. There was a bookstore every 4 feet. You know, it was really a great spot. But yeah, no, I know, you know, and I think that's so that's a great example of our own, you know, what we want to get out of a book, you know, and once you hear once it's set someplace, you know, then you want to sort of revel in your own, you know, and see if her memories or her things that mean something to her line up with the things that you like. You know.
I did like when she realized the bad change in the bookstore was the new owners had taken away the comfortable chairs to sit in.
Yeah.
Because that's Arcadia has some, and that's a good bookstore does have chairs like that.
Well, I wish we had room for more stuff like that. It's just, and I don't know what we're going to do, you know, right now there are no chairs because we're not, you know, we can't have anybody.
Right.
So yeah, we've got a lot to think about over the next, I hope not too many months, but, oh, it's 7 o'clock. Okay, so Nancy and I decided, and Melanie, our cohort, who actually worked at Wordsworth Bookstore and the Harvard Coop for Wordsworth for many years in Harvard Square. I just thought over Christmas that maybe it would be fun to read a classic book rather than something new. So we're proposing, and most of you have probably read this once, but I think it's worth reconnecting with if you haven't. And I've read it a couple of times over many years, but not for 15 years. But Virginia Woolf's book, To the Lighthouse, which is just a really extraordinary novel. And we'll try to get this edition, which is, oh, Allison's excited. Okay.
Well, it's just one of my favorite books of all time. I first read it for a freshman orientation seminar in 1971 at Marlborough College. I had no idea I didn't understand anything about the book, but I was just completely pulled into it.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, I know. There's so much fun when you read those books and then you read them later and you realize.
Yeah, when you understand it later.
How is that possible? Well, anyway, it's a beautiful book. It's not terribly long. My first thought was to read Middlemarch, and then Nancy and I were talking last night, Larry, about the fact that you liked the Ali Smith book because the typeset was big, and I said to Nancy, if we used Ali Smith's typeset for Middlemarch, it would be 2,500 pages long. You have to carry with a crane. but
500 pages isn't going to happen over Christmas.
Yeah. But To the Lighthouse is really only about 200 pages, and it's an extra, it was really one of the sort of revolutionary texts of the 20th century that really started getting people to think about what a novel could do in a different way. So that's the book. Thank you, Larry. I'm really glad that you said all the things you said, because that just led to a very spirited conversation.
And I'm usually easy to please. Do you have a date for To the Lighthouse?
Do we have a date?
We didn't set a date. We were going to do it in January. So
January.
have a little time.
We'll take Christmas month off, because we've all got enough to do, just mostly staying alive, I guess.
Yeah. We have so many places to go.
Well, and besides, once the coup d'etat happens, and then then we'll all have to figure out how to get into our bunkers and stuff. So it's time for the dog to be fed. Thank you.
I think she just doesn't like your jokes.
Yeah, no, she's not.
She's like,
In fact, one of the reasons
I want you to overshare, and she doesn't like your jokes.
one of the reasons that once Helen once said to me, I've lived for the last 50 years. I've lived alone with a dog for 47 of the 50 years, and with another human for 12 of the 50 years. So that's, I guess, why I like dogs. They do put up with my jokes. No one else will. That's all right.
Thank you. I miss the store. I miss our excursions to Arcadia. But I keep ordering.
Yeah, thank you. We all appreciate that. That we should say that out loud all the time. I mean, but all of you have been so great about supporting, and most of the books I order now, I order because Cheryl has ordered them in advance.
Cheryl, I want Cheryl's reading list.
I just get my ideas from the New York Times on Friday. I look at, and they have like books to read in November, and that's where I get my ideas, and the Washington Post.
Yeah, I'm on to you, because now I start circling things and see if I'm right, if you're going to order them the following week.
That morning, right? It's the only way to stay sane, right? Is to read right now.
Yeah.
So,
when
ways.
we go on family vacations, when I was 8 or 9, there's all sorts of these weird, 8mm films of all my brothers and sisters playing in the ocean and me sitting under an umbrella reading. Why?
What a surprise.
Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Yeah, it is.
2021 will be a better year.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yes.
Better be.
January 20th, right?
January 20th, 69 days till inauguration.
It's going to be such a good, better year. Larry's actually going to return to Earth in 2021.
No, I'm going to join the Space Force once Biden is president.
Space Force.
Bye-bye.
Love it.
I love
Bye.
it.
Thank you.